I wasn't supposed to be home until Friday. That was literally the first thought that popped into my head when I saw the light leaking from under my bedroom door. Not fear, not anger, just that weird, trivial detail. My flight back from Denver got bumped because the client bailed on our final presentation. So there I was, dragging my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs at 10:46 on a Wednesday night, fully expecting to surprise my roommate with a bag of greasy takeout and the kind of exhausted venting only she had the patience for. My name is Owen Parker. I'm 32. I manage software support for a medical billing company, and most of my life could be described as stable enough to make other people feel comfortable. I pay my bills early. I keep spare batteries in a kitchen drawer. No one has ever called me spontaneous unless they were being sarcastic. Harper was the total opposite, in every way that made my apartment feel less like a waiting room and more like a home. She was 29, a stage manager for a local theater, and she moved through life like she was always 5 minutes late to something important, yet somehow still knew exactly where everyone else was supposed to stand. She'd been living with me for 8 months after a bad breakup left her with half a lease, 2 dying houseplants, and what she called a tragic distrust of guys with podcast equipment. We had ground rules, separate groceries except for coffee, no dating people from our building. If one of us fell asleep on the couch, the other was allowed to turn off the TV, but taking photographic evidence was strictly forbidden. I was going to tell Harper that I had feelings for her, but then I tore the page out, folded it up, and shoved it inside a book on my nightstand, like a grown man hiding state secrets in a paperback spy novel. Apparently, my hiding spot sucked. Her eyes flicked to the bag, then back to my face. "You're home early. Client canceled." Oh, that single word felt ridiculously heavy. She looked down at the paper in her hands, and my stomach completely dropped. The apartment was dead silent, except for the hum of the fridge down the hall and the muffled sound of traffic outside. In that heavy quiet, every little detail hit me all at once. Her bare feet tucked under my bed frame, the faint redness around her eyes, the desperate way she was gripping that piece of paper, like it was either going to save her or completely ruin us. "I wasn't snooping," she said quickly. That's usually the first thing people say when they're caught holding the evidence. A tiny laugh escaped her, but it broke halfway through. "I came in because your window was open," she explained. "It started raining. Your book fell off the nightstand, and the paper slipped out. I glanced over at the window. Sure enough, rain was streaking the glass. It was believable, terrifyingly believable." She stood up, still clutching the note. "I was going to put it back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I swear I was. But then I saw my name. My throat went dry. I should have cracked a joke. I should have snatched the paper, shrugged it off, said it was nothing, and preserved the delicate little lie we'd been living in. But I just stood there in my rain-damp work shirt, way too tired to keep hiding the truth." Those words felt like a heavy door slamming shut behind us. I looked at the note, then back at her. "If it's that I wrote it," I said, "I think I figured that part out." "No." Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "It's worse than that. It wasn't just my confession anymore." Beneath the last line I remembered writing, "I think I've been falling in love with you since the night you labeled all my spice jars wrong just to see if I'd notice," was an entire paragraph in a completely different handwriting. Her handwriting, small, slanted, and unmistakably Harper. My hands moved before my brain could process it, taking the paper from her. "Owen, I found this by accident. I know that sounds convenient, but it's true, and I should have stopped reading. I didn't. I have feelings for you, too." My heart slammed against my ribs like it had been shoved, but my eyes kept moving down the page. "That's why I have to leave." The room tilted a little. I snapped my head up. "What?" Harper wiped under her eye with the heel of her hand, visibly angry at herself for crying. Keep reading. I really didn't want to, but I did anyway. Not because I don't want this, because I do. Too much. And if I stay, I'm gonna let myself pretend everything is simple. But it isn't. Evan called. That name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Evan. Her ex. The guy who'd left his motorcycle helmet sitting in our coat closet for 2 months, because Harper couldn't bring herself to touch it. The guy whose toxic relationship had been described to me in painful fragments over takeout containers and late-night TV. Controlling, charming, and always full of excuses afterward. He never hit me, she told me once, staring blankly at the floor. He just made me feel like I was losing my mind. I slowly lowered the paper. He called you? She nodded. When? Monday. I had been in Denver on Monday. I distinctly remembered texting her a photo of my hotel coffee labeled artisan roast, and her replying, that coffee looks like it commits tax fraud. She'd sounded completely fine. But that's the scary thing about text messages. People always sound normal. What did he want? I asked. Harper wrapped her arms tightly around herself, letting my oversized sweatshirt swallow her hands. He said he found some of my old things in his storage unit. Boxes from when I moved out. Okay. And he said he wanted to bring them by. My jaw tightened. Here. I told him no. But. She looked away, and my chest went cold. Harper. He came anyway, she admitted softly. The room suddenly felt microscopic. When? I asked, my voice dropping. Yesterday afternoon. I stared at her. He was in our apartment? No, she said quickly. I didn't let him in. That should have offered some relief, but it didn't. He was downstairs, she continued. By the mailboxes. He said he just wanted to talk. Said he'd been going to therapy, that he owed me an apology. I let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh, but came out bitter. Of course he did. I know. Her voice cracked. I know how it sounds. Did he threaten you? No, not directly. Which, coming from her, basically meant yes. I set the letter down on the bed very carefully, like any sudden movement might set off an explosion. What did he say? Harper's face drained of color. He knows about you. The words took a second to sink in. About me? How? She swallowed hard. He said, your roommate looks dependable. Is that your type now? I asked him how he knew about you, she said. He just smiled like I was being dramatic and said people post way too much online. But I don't post anything. I know. Neither of us did, really. A couple of theater flyers on her end, and a blurry photo she'd posted months ago of my hand holding a coffee mug with the caption, Household Gremlin actually makes decent coffee. My hand. No tag, no name, no address. She glanced toward my bedroom door, almost like she expected the answer to be waiting out in the hall. I found something taped to our apartment door tonight. My pulse spiked. What? I opened it, she whispered. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. I reached into the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. It was a shot of Harper and me sitting on our balcony 3 weeks ago. I remembered that exact Sunday morning. She had flour on her cheek from trying to make pancakes, and I'd leaned over to wipe it off while she laughed. In the picture, my hand was still resting near her face. It was intimate, private, and clearly taken from across the street with a zoom lens. On the back, written in Sharpie, tell Owen the truth before I do. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound was the rain ticking against the glass. What truth? I asked, looking up at her. Harper closed her eyes tight, and that was the exact moment I realized the worst part of all this. She already knew what he meant. Harper, I said, my voice dangerously steady. What truth? She kept her eyes squeezed shut, like she could somehow vanish if she stayed still enough. Then, she opened them. I knew Evan before I met you. I blinked, confused. I know that. No. Her voice was barely a breath. I mean, I knew about you before I moved in. The apartment went so dead silent I could hear the clock above the stove ticking. I looked from her face down to the photo on the table. What is that supposed to mean? Harper pulled out a dining chair, but didn't sit down. She just gripped the back of it so hard her knuckles turned white. After Evan and I broke up, he wouldn't leave me alone. He kept calling from new numbers, emailing my work, showing up outside my rehearsals. She swallowed hard. I needed to get away fast. You put up a roommate ad and I answered it. Right? It wasn't random, Owen. Her face crumpled a little, and involuntarily, I took a step back. The movement clearly hurt her. I saw it in her eyes, and I hated myself for noticing. How did you know about me? I asked. I frowned, trying to piece it together. College? You and Evan went to Northridge. My stomach just... I paused. I didn't know him. You did, she said quietly. You just don't remember. Sometimes the past doesn't hit you all at once. It doesn't break down the door. It just quietly slides one tiny piece of the puzzle into place and waits for your body to react before your brain even gets it. Evan. Northridge. Suddenly, a memory resurfaced. A drunk guy outside a fraternity house, screaming at a girl in a red coat. Me, 21 years old and stupidly brave because my friends were standing behind me. I remembered stepping in between them. I remembered telling him, "She said no, man." I remembered him shoving me, and campus security pulling us apart before it turned into a real fight. But his face, his name, I'd completely forgotten. It was just an ugly little blip buried under a decade of life. That was him? I asked. Harper nodded. He remembered you. He remembers everyone who ever made him feel small. I dragged a hand over my face. Suddenly, the whole apartment felt like it was rigged with tripwires. Every ordinary thing, our coffee mugs, her shoes by the door, the half-dead plant on the windowsill, felt staged. So, I started struggling to process it. You moved in with me because Evan hated me? No, she blurted out. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because he was afraid of you. I almost let out a laugh. Harper, I work in software support. I write per my last email when I'm furious. He told me you ruined his life. I don't even remember his life. I know. Tears shimmered in her eyes. That's why I picked your ad. That hurt way more than I expected. I looked back down at the photo on the table. You picked me because you thought I could act as a human shield. At first, she whispered. Those two words hung heavily in the air between us. I wanted to be furious. It would have been so much cleaner, so much easier to just be angry. But underneath the sting was something much heavier. The realization that while I'd been falling for her, building a quiet little life out of shared coffee, couch naps, and stolen sweatshirts, she had walked into my apartment carrying a ghost with my name on it. How much of us was actually real? I asked. She flinched like I'd slapped her. All of it. Don't. All of it, Owen. She stepped around the chair, then forced herself to stop before getting too close. I didn't plan on falling for you. I didn't plan on feeling safe here. And I definitely didn't plan on reading your stupid, beautiful letter and realizing that the one thing I wanted most was the exact thing that puts you right in his crosshairs. He put me there 10 years ago. Because of me now. Because he's a psycho. I shot back. She shook her head, tears spilling over. You don't get it. Evan doesn't just move on. He collects people. He punishes them for daring to leave. I picked up the photo again, staring at the scrawled handwriting on the back. Tell Owen the truth before I do. What else is he holding over you, Harper? Her lips parted to answer, but before she could speak, my phone rang. We both froze. The screen lit up on the table right between us. Unknown caller. Outside, the rain began to beat harder against the glass. The phone rang once, twice. Harper whispered, "Don't answer it." I looked at her, then at the envelope and picked it up. For 3 long seconds, there was nothing on the line except quiet static. Then, a man's voice, calm, confident, and utterly smug, came through the speaker. "Hey Owen, long time no see." My fingers tightened around the phone. Evan chuckled softly. "Did she tell you why she really needed a roommate?" I didn't answer right away. Some people have voices that sound exactly like the villain they are. Smooth, completely unbothered, almost friendly. The kind of guy who could call you crazy while standing in your hallway with a weapon. Harper stared at the phone like it was a live grenade. "Don't hang up," Evan said. "That would be rude." I tapped the speaker button and set the phone flat on the table. Harper's face went chalk white. "Evan?" she said, her voice dropping. "There she is," he replied, sounding almost amused. "What do you want?" I demanded. Straight to the point. "I always liked that about you, Owen. You don't know me." "Sure I do. You're the White Knight. Always jumping in, always playing the hero when there's an audience." My pulse was thumping loudly in my ears. Across the table, Harper shook her head frantically, mouthing, "Don't engage." I ignored her. "You took photos of us." "I took one photo. You came to our building." "Our?" he echoed, laughing softly. "That's cute." Harper grabbed the edge of the table. "Evan, leave him out of this." "See, that's the whole issue, Harp. You're the one who dragged him into it." Hearing her nickname in his mouth made my stomach churn. Evan let out a dramatic sigh. "I gave you a chance to be honest with him." "She was," I snapped. "No, she wasn't." Harper squeezed her eyes shut. I looked at her, a sickening feeling settling deep in my chest. Evan's voice dropped, thick with satisfaction. "Did she mention the money?" I turned slowly to look at her. "Harper," I murmured. "There it is." Evan gloated over the line. "That little pause right there. That's the sound of the foundation cracking." "What money?" I asked. Harper's mouth trembled. Evan didn't hesitate to answer for her. "When she walked out, she cleaned out $10,000 from my safe." "That is a complete lie," Harper shouted at the phone. "Careful, Harp." "No." Her voice sliced through the tension, sharper and louder than I'd ever heard it. "You don't get to rewrite what happened." I stared at her. She didn't sound scared anymore. She sounded pure, unfiltered furious. She locked eyes with me. "It wasn't his money, Owen. It was mine. Cash from theater gigs, side jobs, tax refunds, every dollar I saved over 2 years because he tracked my credit cards, my bank apps, my Venmo. I hid it in his safe because he was too arrogant to think I'd ever figure out the code." "You stole from me," Evan sneered. "You trapped me," she fired back. The whole apartment felt like it was holding its breath. I stared at her, not because I doubted her story, but because I was seeing a totally different side of the woman sitting across from me. This was a survivor who had endured hell and only ever talked about it in soft, polite terms. Evan clicked his tongue. "And then she used my cash to pay your deposit." My eyes flicked back to Harper. Her posture instantly collapsed. "The security deposit," she whispered. I remembered it vividly. Harper standing in my kitchen 8 months ago, handing me an envelope of cash because her bank was acting up after the move. I told her it was no big deal. I didn't ask questions because I thought being a good guy meant not prying. So, technically, Owen, Evan said smoothly, you've been harboring a thief and taking stolen cash. I almost laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because this guy actually thought that was going to scare me more than what he'd put her through. You're terrible at threats, I said. Silence stretched across the line. Harper looked at me like I'd just stepped off a ledge. When Evan spoke again, the charm was completely gone. His voice was thin and sharp. You always were a smug bastard. There it is, I said. The real you. You have no idea what you're messing with. I know plenty. No, you don't. His tone turned cold as ice. I know where she works. I know where you work. I know your mother lives by herself in Cedar Rapids. The air completely rushed out of the room. Harper covered her mouth in horror. My hands balled into tight fists. Evan went on. So let's drop the romantic drama. Harper walks downstairs in 10 minutes. Alone. We talk. And maybe I forget any of this happened. I turned toward the window. 3 stories down, parked right under the flickering streetlight, sat a sleek black sedan. Its engine was idling, exhaust rising into the chilly air. I hadn't noticed it before. Harper followed my gaze and caught sight of the car. Her eyes filled with absolute panic. No, she breathed. Evan chuckled through the speaker. Clock's ticking, Owen. I grabbed the phone off the table. You listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice eerily calm. She is not coming down there. Oh, really? And if you come down here, if I come down there, the police will be waiting before you can even finish your first threat. You think the cops scare me? No. I glanced at Harper. But audio recordings usually do. Silence. For the first time, Evan had nothing to say. Harper stared at me in shock. I reached down and nudged my laptop bag with my shoe. My work laptop automatically records every incoming call when my phone is connected to it for client compliance. You've been on speaker for the last 2 minutes. It was a total bluff, well, half a bluff. I had recording software, but whether it had actually picked up the call, I had no clue. Evan didn't know that, though. His heavy breathing filled the speaker. You're full of it, he spat. Try me. Another agonizing silence. Then, from down on the street, the black car sounded its horn. One sharp, furious blast that made Harper jump. Evan's voice returned, low and poisonous. You just made a huge mistake. The line clicked dead. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, something heavy slammed violently against our front door. The second strike rattled the door frame. Harper grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. Owen! I was already dialing 911. My ex-boyfriend is trying to break into our apartment. Harper blurted out the moment the dispatcher answered. Her voice shaking but resolute. He threatened us. He's outside our door right now, and his car is parked downstairs. Suddenly, Mrs. Alvarez from 3B shouted from down the hall. I see you, you piece of garbage. I'm on the phone with the police right now. The pounding instantly stopped. Everything froze for one terrifying second. Then, frantic footsteps sprinted down the stairwell. I rushed over to the peephole just in time to see the back of Evan's jacket disappear down the landing. Harper was still on the phone giving details to the dispatcher, but her free hand reached out and gripped mine so tightly our knuckles hurt. The sirens arrived 6 minutes later, though it felt like 6 years. The police caught Evan 2 blocks away after he clipped a parked vehicle trying to speed off. In his back seat, officers found a roll of duct tape, a tire iron, and a folder filled with printed photos of Harper, me, our apartment building, her theater, and my mother's house in Cedar Rapids. That was the exact moment I stopped second-guessing whether I'd overreacted. At the police station, Harper gave her statement for 3 grueling hours. I sat out in the waiting room with a cup of terrible, lukewarm coffee, feeling the folded letter resting in my jacket pocket. Every time the door clicked open, I stood up. Every time it wasn't her, I sat back down, trying not to think about what her life must have been like before she moved into my apartment. Before our silly coffee rules. Before the gray sweatshirt she was still wearing like armor. When she finally walked out, she looked exhausted enough to collapse. "I'm so sorry, Owen," she whispered. I stood up. "If you apologize one more time, I'm going to tell Mrs. Alvarez you hate her flan." Harper blinked, then let out a small laugh. It was tired and cracked at the edges, but it was genuine. As it turned out, the recording was real. My laptop had auto-synced the call while connected to my phone. Evan's threats were so clear that even the lead detective raised his eyebrows while listening. The folder of photos helped seal it, too, along with Mrs. Alvarez's statement, which was so wildly detailed it included a critique of Evan's cheap shoes and terrible haircut. Harper got a protective order. Evan was charged, and I ended up with 3 worried voicemails from my mom asking why an officer had called her and whether that lovely roommate of yours is eating enough. For a while after that, Harper slept on the couch with every light in the apartment turned on. Not because I asked her to stay, but because I told her she was free to leave whenever she wanted. So she stayed. We changed the locks. We changed our routines. We changed the way silence felt in the apartment. And slowly, the fear stopped consuming every room. 2 weeks later, I woke up to find my gray sweatshirt neatly folded outside my bedroom door. Sitting on top of it was the paper, my confession, her confession, and a brand new line written at the very bottom. "Can we start over?" Honestly, this time, I walked into the kitchen and found her pretending to read the label on the coffee tin. "Hi," I said softly. "I'm Owen. I'm pretty boring, way too overprepared, and apparently terrible at hiding emotional paperwork." She turned around, her eyes bright. "Hi," she smiled. "I'm Harper. I'm a mess, a bit complicated, and really good at stealing sweatshirts. It's nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you, too." We didn't kiss that day, and that felt right. Instead, we brewed a pot of coffee, sat at opposite ends of the couch, and talked until noon about everything we'd been avoiding. Evan, the money, the roommate ad, the letter, and the fact that love built on secrets can still become real if both people are willing to tear down the rotten parts and rebuild from scratch. 6 months later, Harper moved into her own place. Not because we broke up, but because she needed her own door, her own lease, and her name on something she earned all by herself. I helped her carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs, and she bossed me around like a true stage manager until every lamp, book, and rescued plant was in its proper spot. That night, after eating pizza on the floor, she handed me a brass key. "No pressure," she said gently. "No expectations. Just a key." I looked down at the key in my palm, then up at her. For the first time since I'd met her, Harper looked completely, beautifully unguarded. It's been a year since that night, and I still come home early sometimes. But now, when I unlock the door, Harper is usually curled up on my couch wearing one of my sweatshirts, her feet tucked under her, reading like she owns the place. And honestly, maybe she does. Not because she needed a place to hide, but because she chose to stay. Last Friday, the rain was streaking the windows again, just like it did that night. I noticed our old, creased letter framed on her bookshelf, our handwritings intertwined under the glass. Harper walked up behind me, slipped her hand into mine, and rested her head against my shoulder. No fear waiting behind the door. No heavy secrets on the bed. Just 2 people standing together in the warm kitchen light, holding the truth safely between them. like something that was finally built to last.